I invite you to enter this Advent season with the hope, faith, and wonder of a child. Fill your heart and mind with excitement as you consider the spiritual gifts that are yours for the asking. Establish your faith in the expectancy of good being poured out upon you. Consider all the ways you might radiate these good gifts out into the world. Make room in your life for the rebirth of Christ within you, and rest assured, beloved one, that you have truly received the most prized gift of all. Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of heaven belongs." Matthew chapter 19, page 14, verse 14. On this day of Advent, I affirm the highest and best for all humanity with the hope and faith of a child.
There is only love. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Donna Sue. And we are so glad to have you back. You are a blessing to us. Today marks the beginning of a very special time of the year in the Christian calendar. It is the first week of Advent. The word Advent comes from the Latin root adventus. Sounds like adventure, right? That's basically what it is. It's a coming of sorts. Traditionally, Advent is the 4 weeks of expectation and preparation for the birth of the baby Jesus, which we celebrate as Christmas. Christmas was first started to celebrate Advent in the 5th century. During Advent, we focus on one attribute of our spiritual nature each week, and we call it forth into our consciousness. The 4 weeks are the 4 attributes. Advent is week 1, faith and hope. Week 2, peace. Week 3, love. And week 4, joy. Because we have so many new people coming in and out of our center, I thought it would be a good idea to lay down the fundamental concept of the Advent season from the unity perspective. So what is it that makes it different from the traditional? Well, essentially is how we fundamentally see the Christian story and the Bible and the Hebrew Bible in the first place, the Judeo-Christian model. John 4:24 tells us that for God is spirit, and those who worship God must worship God in spirit and in truth. That being so, then logically speaking, the Bible is a spiritual book. And I would say, and we do in unity, that it should be interpreted fundamentally from a spiritual perspective and not so much from a literal perspective. Seeing the Bible in this way represents a view of a much larger picture. I keep saying that, larger picture. One in which the stories and the characters represent the different stages of conscious unfolding in our infinite spiritual journey. I've said it before, I'll say it again. If the Bible is literal, then it is a story of some people. But if it is seen as allegory, from a higher spiritual perspective, then it becomes a story about all people. That's very different. That makes a whole lot more sense. And in the case of the Advent season, that means that we are reaching that point, or have reached that point, in which we are beginning the process, the preparing for the coming, for the awakening, not so much of baby Jesus, though that's good and well too, but the awakening of our Christ consciousness within. We're beginning that process. And so from this perspective, Christmas is not so much about the baby Jesus, but though it is, but it is about us individually, each one of us, from a spiritual concept that we are beginning to see life through the lens of a spiritual being instead of a human being. When I first heard this, I thought, wow, why does this make so much sense to me? And of course, it is because it represents a larger picture. And I'm always talking about the larger picture. I've always felt the traditional approach would just seem too small for me. I just couldn't make it work. It needed so much more, inclusivity for one, and a lot of other things. And so this view of Advent makes not only the Christian model, but all spiritual books about everyone. It's all about everyone. So I want you to remember that the stories were passed down orally. So some of them may have taken place. Some of them part have taken place. Some of them may have been changed, and just to make a story about what they were trying to say. But the point is the larger story within the overall idea. And I believe all religions, and you probably do too, are probably saying, we are all talking about the same thing. God doesn't have chosen people. And the sooner we realize these kind of things, then the sooner we're going to come together as a global community, which we need to do. I want to ask you something. I mean, many of you probably have more than one child. And do you have a favorite? I don't. And if you did have a favorite, what would that say about you, actually? And what would it say about God if God had favorites? These things make no sense. So anyway, let's move into this first attribute, hope and love. Let's begin by defining what faith is. The answer to this question may depend on how religious, spiritual you are or not. The definition from the dictionary addresses both, and here's what it says. The first one is complete trust or confidence in someone or something. That would be faith pertaining to this world, and no one really disagrees with that. We use it all the time. I have faith in you. You can do it. Definition number two is a strong belief in God or in the doctrines of a religion based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. This second one is not so readily agreed upon by all. The part that said rather than proof is what critics of religion use to downplay the value of religion. And when I was growing up, maybe you did too, that was probably my criticism, because that's what eventually led me to Unity. And it was a strange place to be, because somehow I knew something was going on, but what I was being told just didn't make sense. I didn't know what to do with it. Anyway, as I told you before, the answer was always, you have to have faith. And I was like, I'm the curious guy, I'm the philosophy guy. And I said, but how can I have faith in something that I just sounded to me and feels like logically inconsistent? It doesn't make sense to me. And like the idea that God had favorites, or that the idea that this one short temporary life has the consequence of eternity. I said, wow, that's kind of a strange trade-off there. And I have a saying, I have several sayings. My saying is that the consequence of a temporary life in a temporary world can only be temporary. That's what I think, but anyway. And that was just two of the many, many questions that I had growing up. Blind faith, not the band. I like the band. But blind faith was not something I could really just, hang my hat on. But I needed to find answers. I always did. And so I kept searching. My search continued and probably will never stop. And I'm guessing you're the same way. Because if the journey were to end, that would mean I reached the end. Is there such a thing? I don't know. We live in an infinite universe, it seems. And so it seems that if we live in an infinite universe, then there must be a part of us that is infinite. It just makes sense. I have another saying. I'm a child of the universe, of an infinite universe. How can I not be that which it is? How is it possible? Is it not? We are created in the image and likeness of God. Change that word. In the image and likeness of the infinite universe. Wow. So all the spiritual masters have told us this all along. This is knowledge that has been known, but we don't have access to it because we don't have the degree of realization that is required for it. Not that we don't have it. We have not reached that unfoldingness of it. And like they say, your God is as big as your consciousness is. Just as big. So Advent represents that beginning of the process. When I took the 12 Powers of Man through my ministry study, I learned something about faith. And it says that there are different kinds of faith. There's 3 phases of faith that we go through. And the first is not actually faith. It says it is hope. From the Bible we read that now faith is the substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. Yes, and yet hope does not mean expectation in this sense. And you'll see that little thing in the book right there, and I want to share it to you in a minute. It has to do more with potentiality. Potentiality is an interesting subject because we have talked about it before. So on page 20 of that book, it says, the birth of Jesus represents awakening to the power within to create our own holiday. Hope is a vision of possibilities unencumbered by past or even current circumstances, becomes a seed planted in the heart. The second phase is blind faith that Charles Fillmore talked about in our Revealing Word. And if you know, the Revealing Word is a little pocket thing of metaphysical interpretations. And in blind faith, it says, an intuitive trust in a power higher than ourselves. Because blind faith does not understand the principles of being, it is liable to discouragement and disappointment. And to me, that means blind faith is just that, subject to error. And it's, like I said, I was never much for blind faith when I was young. And at this point, I can kind of say that I've moved on from that. So there's a quote, and it says, believe nothing of what you hear and only half of what you see. And if you are in the Let's Get Metaphysical class on Wednesday morning, then you're kind of getting this because we talk about some things like, oh boy. And that moves us into a third phase, it's hard to say, phase of faith. And it is understanding faith. Once again, the Revealing Word says, a faith that functions from principle. It is based on knowledge of truth. It understands the law of mind action. Therefore, it has great strength. You all familiar with mind action? Mind action is thoughts held in mind produce after their kinds, right? So in the human analogy, we go through different stages with our unfolding of faith. Once again, the scripture says, when I was a child, I thought like a child. Now that I've left my childish ways behind. So you can see that we are unfolding spiritually, and as we do, we discern the world around us and life itself very differently. Now, to these three phases of faith, I want to add another one that is not in unity so much, but it's something that I feel. And for me, the natural progression from hoping to believing is to knowing. I like to put it this way. Nowhere in the Bible or anywhere else does it say God believes all things. It says God knows all things. And I've heard somewhere along the way that we're entering a new level of consciousness, universal consciousness, in which we know. So we're moving beyond that. I like knowing. I just do. Plato said that all knowledge is recollection, which means that we intuitively know these things. And if we are truly children of God, then why would we not know these things? Or at least have it within us the potential to know these things. So always back to that potential thing. It's really up to you. Where are you at? Where is your consciousness at? And using a lot of quotes from the Bible today, because the Bible really does talk about the bigger picture. But once again, we didn't have the consciousness to hear it in that way. And it says it there clearly. For those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. Now, of course, that's not a literal thing. Everybody has eyes and ears. That's not the point here. The point is, what do you hear? Where is your consciousness? And for me, that feeling of that faith has always been there. But it's coming around to a new realization. The bigger picture is coming into place. In summary, Advent symbolically, spiritually, represents that point of beginning that transition from believing to knowing. That's how I feel about it. The time will come when we no longer have faith in the truth. We have knowledge of the truth. The truth shall set you free. It's a bigger picture. I want to finish with a quote by Joan Borensenko, a psychologist, about that book that I have. It's called Inner Peace for Busy People. Maybe I'll talk about that sometime. 52 simple strategies for transforming your life, it says. And guess what the 52nd one is? Keep the faith. Yeah. But there's a line in there that really caught my attention because it truly represents how I feel about faith. What made me finally say, I got that. That faith makes sense to me. And it says this: in the end, faith is less about a set of beliefs than your willingness to surrender to a mysterious force of love and guidance that helps you find your way. Now, that's a big picture. I'm going to read it again. In the end, faith is less about a set of beliefs than your willingness to surrender to a mysterious force of love and guidance that helps you find your way. Wow. So now I invite you just for a moment to close your eyes and contemplate the message of today of faith and hope. We begin, as always, with a few centering breaths. We turn our attention inwardly as we consider the idea of hope and faith. We are ever grateful for this time together as a spiritual community. We are grateful for this time in which we share and create a place of absolute peace and love through the practices we engage in this morning. We are mindful that the process of being human is one of unfolding and expanding that takes place every moment of every day. During this time of Advent, we are reminded that along our spiritual journey, we come to stages of consciousness in which we move into a different level of understanding. Advent marks such a launching pad. It symbolizes the coming, the adventus, of a new and higher reality for us, a reality that opens us up to a greater wisdom, a reality unity refers to as the Christ consciousness. It is my belief that we in unity are in that point where we are beginning to see that there is a much larger picture. And as we work our way through this hope and through the process of a blind faith and through our understanding faith, on into the beginning of knowing who we truly are, as we are told in Psalms 82:6, God's and children of the Most High. And as we say, spiritual beings having a human experience. And so it is at the time of Advent, and we continue next week.